Hey, everybody. Want to give you a little bit of guidance on the roadmap outline. I'm sure you've all seen the guidelines and a few examples that were posted on Canvas, but I realized that this is, the first major assignment of trying to put ideas of your synthesis down in one place, and it could be a little daunting. So a little bit of extra guidance, I think, is warranted. Just as a reminder, we're doing everything in sort of stepwise fashion. It's all iterative, it's all building. And so, we've talked a little bit about communication through the message box and 2-minute pitch. We've talked a bit about synthesis already, and this roadmap outline and the visual aid throwdown are two sort of beginning parts of that process. And of course, we've talked about the presentation process too, evaluating examples, and we'll get into other portions of that soon. But of course, for the synthesis, we really do want to focus some attention on this roadmap outline. And of course, just like anytime we mention the word outline, I know some people grind their teeth and they hate it, but really outlines are extremely useful. The outline, the whole point of the outline, one, is to save you time and to save me time, and to save your faculty advisor and site supervisor some time as well. What I mean by that is, I need to give you some feedback on things. And if I wait until you've completed a full draft, then, we'll have to wait until further on down the line in the quarter. And that's not a really efficient use of the quarter, of the 10 weeks that we have. Also, it's very quick for me to go through an outline. It takes a lot longer to go through 10, 12, 15 pages of writing. Also, I find that students oftentimes, if they free write, focus a lot of attention on the background and context and less attention on the really hard parts, such as trying to distill out their arguments. And of course, the same issues with time come up when you're trying to get feedback from your faculty advisor and site supervisor. So I really do think an outline is the best approach to take. We are going to follow standard outline format. We went over this back in 490, and I just to remind you what that looks like. The headings, context and background, research question or thesis, internship and methods, key findings or arguments or whatever you want to call it, and then the significance or implications. Those are the headings. They do not get a Roman numeral. They are elevated above the actual outline. But what does get a Roman numeral is every topic sentence, right? So Roman numerals are the main points of each paragraph, and then capital letters and numbers, lowercase letters, those are the subpoints of each paragraph. So, the main point is the topic sentence. That's a Roman numeral. Everything else are the details, whether they are examples or evidence or, you name it. The whole point of this, though, is to start to structure the paper. And if you structure the paper with each Roman numeral being a paragraph, that helps me to understand how things are coming together and how much length you plan on and how much detail you plan on putting into each section. So when I'm looking at your outline, if I see one Roman numeral in the background and context, I'm going to start to wonder how much depth you're going to go into there. All right, so please try to follow this approach where the headings don't get Roman numerals. They are elevated above, but every paragraph, topic sentence gets a Roman numeral, and the subpoints under that topic sentence are either uppercase letters, numbers, or lowercase letters, etc. That's the approach I want you to take. All right, let's talk about the various sections. The first, of course, is the background and context. The point of the background and context is to provide the background and rationale for the work and really to set the stage for your question. It's giving us all the information that we need to understand where you're going with your work. This does not have to be an all-encompassing, tome on the topic of at hand. You really do want to get to the point relatively quickly, and because the overall synthesis is not a very long paper, you don't really need to spend a huge amount of time in the outline either. Start generally, broadly, and become more specific. That's the approach that I like to take. But you still want to cover some material here in the background and context. And so I would recommend following this approach. It's actually a fairly easy method that it's kind of a formula that I like to follow. And it's based roughly on Randy Olson's and but therefore model. Okay, so if you imagine a model in the background and context that is 4 Roman numerals, so 4 paragraphs, that's the minimum, 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph should be the big picture environmental issue. So connect what you're doing to the big picture. The second paragraph, its relation to your more specific topic. So you can imagine the first paragraph and the second paragraph are connected by the word and. Then the third paragraph is the but. And the but is the challenge that you're trying to overcome. And then finally, in the 4th Roman numeral or 4th paragraph, you get to the therefore, and that should be the summation of your research leading to your research question. So what that might look like, if I was say doing a topic on, I'll just choose an example from a previous capstone. Let's just say environmental education is the general topic, and we're focusing on outdoor ed, and in particular, the impact of weather conditions on learning. Let's just say that. So the impact of conditions on learning. So it might be something to the effect of the big picture issue is research has shown that that children are becoming disconnected from the natural environment, and this is leading to lower interest in sustainability and care for our natural world. And outdoor education seeks to reconnect students to the natural world through biophilia and experiential learning. Okay, those are the first 2 paragraphs. Big picture, then outdoor education. Now the but is the challenge. But learning in an outdoor environment is fraught with a variety of challenges, including physical conditions which may impair learning. All right, you can go into some detail there in that paragraph. And then finally, the therefore, the 4th Roman numeral, the 4th paragraph, which is, therefore, my research sought to investigate the issue or the challenge of physical conditions and how it impacts student learning through a variety of techniques, including a literature review, some observations of children in an outdoor school setting, and my internship working with the Audubon Society of Seattle. Through this process, I asked the question, blah, 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 blah. Okay, then you get to your question. So that's the and, but, therefore model. Now, that's the basic, right? That's 4 paragraphs, that's the basics, but you could add additional paragraphs with additional Roman numerals. So say, for instance, not only do you want to talk about the big picture issue, but maybe you want to go into some more detail about the issue of, the research around the lack of nature experience in children, or maybe you want to talk about, you want to have a paragraph that talks about sort of the history of outdoor education. There are places where you can bring in additional paragraphs if you want to provide some additional background, and that just would be an additional Roman numeral. And so then as you start to develop this, we can start to see how many paragraphs might go into the background context. All right, so that's the first portion. Now we want to talk about the internship. Now, the important thing about the internship and methods section is that this paper is not going to be about your internship, right? So you're basically providing information about your internship because you need to contextualize your experience, right? The internship is a case study. It's not the focus in most cases. And so you have to put what you did specifically in the bigger, in the grand scheme of things. So the idea behind describing your objectives and the responsibilities that you use to complete your deliverables is really about explaining your experience and your expertise so that when you refer to that later on in your paper, it all makes sense, right? Because you can start to talk about your firsthand experience through anecdotal observation. But for this section of the paper, the internship and methods section, I really just want you to provide, a few paragraphs really about not only your objectives, but your responsibilities and how you went about completing your deliverables. Okay. Then you want to talk about your methods, right? Succinctly explain how you went about answering your question. And this might be, in order to answer my research question, I did X, Y, and Z. And then you might go into more detail about whether it's about your literature review or about the interviews or surveys that you conducted, or maybe it's the GIS analysis that you completed. Anyway, you're going to be talking about those methods, and the methodology is really a bit like a cookbook, right? You want to kind of cover the basics about how someone would do, complete the work. You don't have to go necessarily step by step, but you do have to kind of give us the broad brush view of how you went about your work. And this is a place where you would want to include citations, right? So if you did a particular GIS analysis, then cite papers that discuss this type of analysis. If you did interviews or surveys, cite papers that talk about interview and survey methodology. That's where you integrate in the published literature on methods. I provided a couple of examples online, and one of the ones that I showed here, I think, does a really good job, particularly of talking about the research question and the internship and methods. I don't think it does quite as good a job on the background. As you can plainly see, they only use one Roman numeral there, and I think that could probably be expanded quite a bit. Just as sort of a side note, my examples that I provide for you are not meant to demonstrate the one way to do things, but it's a reasonably good outline. And if you look at several of those examples, you start to see some features of each one that are positive. All right, then we get to the results or arguments section. And then the idea here is to describe the key findings that directly address your research question. Now, one thing I didn't talk about is I didn't really talk about the research question, and maybe I should. Some folks will choose to use the research question that they started with back in 490. Maybe you want to change your research question. The point I really do want to stress about the research question for your paper is that you're shifting from an investigative question, the question that guides your research, to what we might think of as a rhetorical question, right? At this point, you know the answer, right? And so you're going to give us the results. It's just a rhetorical device that you're using to explain something about the work that you did. And what that means is if you need to change your rhetorical question so that it fits the results you want to share with your audience, that's totally fine. You can do that. You don't have to stick with your original research question that you started with back in 490. This is part of an evolution of thinking, right? So if you need to change your research question, you can certainly do that. All right. The really important part about the results section, or the key findings section, whatever you want to call it, is that you need to highlight the big takeaways from your work, usually 3 to 5 big takeaways. And you should be able to support your key findings with evidence. And remember, there's 3 different types of evidence that we typically use. One is evidence anecdotally from your internship. What did you glean from that process? 2, probably the one that's going to be the most comfortable for you to use, is the literature that you have reviewed, right? You've reviewed literature as part of your proposal and as part of your annotated bibliography. You should be able to draw on that literature. And the third type, which is also very important, and many of you collected some form of additional data. I want to see how you bring that in, whether it's, as I said, some sort of GIS analysis or interviews or surveys. If it's interviews, we start to think about like thematic analyses, right? What are the major themes, and what are some quotes that you can bring in that support your main arguments? All right, so this is again just a screenshot of one of the examples that I provided. In this case, this person it talks about the from interviews and surveys and literature, some of the key factors that impact, well, going back to their question about the factors that impact volunteer experience, in this case, the major findings are these things like multiple training opportunities, clear and frequent communication, well-designed, thorough reference materials, maintaining awareness of volunteer mental and physical comfort. Those are the big takeaways. I personally think each one of those should be a Roman numeral, right? Because each one of those is a paragraph. But again, this is an example. The one thing I do like about the way this student developed this this outline is that the factors, the response to the question, are very, very clear in this case, and each one is supported not only by the student's own findings, but by the literature. So they're bringing in multiple sources of evidence as well. All right. The last text portion of or writing portion of the outline, or the implications and significance section. This is where you might want to sort of restate your thesis and summarize your main points briefly, but also consider recommendations for future research or improvements to current practices or next steps. This is an opportunity for you to reflect on what you learned, what your major takeaways are, and then tell us the now what, okay? But don't forget to come up with some sort of strong closing statement. You don't want to just drop off at the end. Come up with something that ties it all together. Sometimes a quote can be useful for that, a quote from someone famous or someone, one of your interviewees. There's lots of different ways that you can do that, but try to come up with some way to tie it all together. This is the example. In this case, this person goes into a little bit more about data quality and things like that. There's lots of different ways that you can spin your implications in broader significance section. But again, you want to try to tie it to published literature whenever possible. And then last, the reference section, right? There's a minimum number of sources, but honestly, I think that the minimum number is probably not enough. And you should be thinking about any statement that you make within the outline or within your synthesis, for that matter, should be supported somehow, whether it's from your data or from the published literature. Visual aids, you can see my other lecture about visual aids, and I would encourage you to check that out. But but make sure that you have some visual aids. You should also notice from the examples that visual aids are referenced within the outline. So make sure you're doing that. We need to see a connection between the visual aids and where you think they will fall within your outline draft. Here are some examples. Photos are great. Figures are good, although pie charts aren't my favorite. But those are certainly useful. And recall that your deliverables should be referenced in the internship section, and they should appear within an appendix at the end of the document, just like this. And there's an example of the appendix on Canvas, which you should be able to take a look at. Okay, that's it. Hopefully that all makes sense to you. You know, this is just the first step, and I understand that it is challenging, but you're all going to do great. This document will give us something to talk about and reflect on so that we can improve it. And as you start to move towards the draft, the first order draft, you'll have a good starting point. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.